Welcome to episode 137 of the Jackson Rudolph Podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Rudolph. And this evening we are joined by the one, the only Matt Emig. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. And I just want to give a quick intro to everybody. First off, if you don't know who Matt is, then you haven't been watching this show long enough, because I think I mentioned Matt Emig in one way, shape, or form in pretty much every episode because of what he's meant to sport karate. Greatest nunchuck competitor of all time. In my opinion, the greatest extreme martial artist, all around forms and weapons of all time. I think we've gone into that on the show before. But this is a guy that is extremely influential to the development and growth of our sport. Now crushing it out in Hollywood as a stuntman, doing all kinds of cool jobs that I'm sure we're going to talk about. So Matt, thank you, man, for taking the time to come on the show again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be back.
Awesome. And for everybody tuning in, this is live, so make sure to drop those comments down below if you got questions. When else do you get an opportunity to ask Matt Emig a question? So drop those in the comments down below. And in the meantime, last time we had Matt on the podcast was back in 2022. So I want to start with just a little bit of a life update, Matt. Kind of tell us how things have been going, maybe any jobs you've done in the interim, and how everything is.
Since then, 22. Let's see. I worked on some Netflix shows. I had one movie called Incoming I was on. Family Switch. I did a few days on the Santa Clauses. 2023, I was working on Thunderbolts. Then we went on strike, so we took a break for a while. Then last year we went back and we finished it. It's a Marvel movie coming out this summer, I think in May. What else have I done? I worked a little bit on Nobody 2. I think that's it since the last time I talked to you.
Right. You bring up like this really interesting part of like the Hollywood timeline in 2023 when everybody like went on strike.
Mm-hmm.
I know a little bit of it from like Gabrielle starting to get into the industry on the acting side and everything, as well as other friends and stuff. But like, what's that like from your perspective as a stunt performer and just kind of having, I think it was several months there, right, where you guys are just on strike?
Yeah, we were prepping for Thunderbolts, and then they sent us home. They just said, all right, pack your bags. Tomorrow's your last day. And hopefully we start up soon. It started because the writers were striking. They have a different union than SAG, that's actors and stunts. We were striking, and then it ended up lasting like, I think 6 or 7 months before we all went back to work. Yeah, crazy times.
That is wild. And then another thing, this being a sport karate show, we got to mention, I mean, there are so many sport karate alumni that are out in Hollywood and really all over right now. I know Atlanta's become another hub. People go up to Toronto as well. And maybe there's others that I'm not aware of. But bottom line is we've got a bunch of sport karate alumni that are on the stunt scene. So how much just kind of in your day-to-day, whether it's training or on set doing jobs, how much are you kind of rubbing elbows with other old sport karate guys?
Sometimes, on Thunderbolts, I was working with Anish Churfa, Justin Eaton, bow staff guy, team kick, John Nania, sword guy, sport karate. Mackenzie Emery was out there for a week. Last year I was working on Nobody 2 with Daniel Graham, Kyle McLean, Kirk Jenkins. Who else? Worked with Ross Constam on Obi-Wan a couple years back. Craig Henningsen, I got to see a bunch in Atlanta. He wasn't on Thunderbolts with me, but where my apartment was, he was working on Cobra Kai, like literally down the street. So I'd meet up with him like once a week, midweek. We'd just go out, get some food, grab a drink, catch up,
That's awesome. It's just so cool. Like as somebody that's a fan of the sport, and I'm sure people tuning in can appreciate this too. Just like the fact that, as we move on in life, these things come up and people reconnect. And that is another thing that for any like young people watching the show, young competitors, and we're going to get into this with Matt by the end. But like this is a real pipeline that exists in our sport. This is something that we all recognize that you can't just be a sport karate competitor forever. Ultimately, you need to mobilize that career into something else, right?
Mhm.
And you can continue competing for a long time. Like the 30 plus division is as robust as it has ever been right now. So this doesn't mean you have to ever stop competing like Matt and I have, but you do have to find like the something else, right? And for a lot of really talented sport karate alumni, that next step is to try to go and make it big doing stunts, as of course Matt has done successfully. And he just name dropped a whole bunch of people that you guys got to make sure that you give a YouTube search. And I still hold out hope. I remember, I think I've mentioned this on the show before, but obviously I didn't go into stunts. I'm about to graduate from medical school. But I remember when I was working at Century, you'll find this entertaining. I read an old Karate Illustrated article about Jimmy.
You were telling me about this.
And it was talking about how Jimmy Pham was going to UCLA to be a pre-med, right? Which obviously like a far cry from like actually going to and finishing medical school. But like, as far as I know, nobody's like heard out of Jimmy Pham since like that happened. And he left sport karate and then he supposedly went to go be a pre-med. And so I have this like fantasy that one day I'll walk into an operating room somewhere. Pham? Wait, what? But anyway. So on this like sport karate train, you were just back in the sport karate world at Competes, getting a chance to kind of watch some of the action. I saw you get kind of roped into some nunchuck reels and some sink sections while you were there.
I did.
I just want to start with just kind of your overview of what it's like, being back at the event and maybe anybody that stood out to you.
Yeah, it was fun. It was my first time going to a tournament in a few years. I guess the last time was Compete Nationals in 2022, maybe. I'm not sure. It was a couple of years. Last year I was in Atlanta, and the year before Atlanta, I think I missed a year. I was doing something else. But yeah, it was fun. There's a lot of new faces, new talent. This generation definitely has definitely really impressive. They do a lot of difficult stuff. I'm impressed with everybody's releases and difficult tricks. Who stands out, you asked? Philip Broom, Esteban Tremblay. I like Dawson and Ben.
Paul Mitchell guy at heart, right?
Yeah. Zeke Gomez is on the come up. Nunchuck guy.
Yeah.
Who else? I think you asked me this question a couple of years back too. Who did I say then? Olive, maybe?
Yeah, I don't remember who you said back then, but it's like the sport changes so fast. You know what I mean? Like the guys that we're talking about now were, in the juniors. And, I guess 2022, that might have been 2022 was when they all like got the shot to come up and do Paul Mitchell, right? If my memory serves me right. I think that all happened in 2022. So the last time we talked, it was probably like right after a lot of those guys got on the team. And then now they've like kind of created their careers on the team in a way. Obviously, Philip newer to the team, relatively speaking. But yeah, Zeke making the jump into the 14-17 division and really kind of, growing into his body. And he's capable of just some crazy chucks releases. And I love that you kind of underline that part of how much the game has changed because we go back and like, your generation releases were, maybe once performed. Like Rudy never threw his commas. You had like a couple of Chuck's releases that you would do. But like the fact that people are now doing consistently somewhere between 10 and 15 releases a form is like a complete shift in the way that people think about weapons, right?
Yeah, definitely. When I started, nobody released a weapon. Maybe Casey Nash. It was like one release. Maybe Joey Greenhall threw his bow staff up. There's a few people. The other weapons didn't do releases. Then years later, more and more weapons were releasing. I would throw like 1 to maybe 3 releases tops. Now there's like you said, there's a lot. Maybe too much. I feel like everyone's trying to be like Jackson Rudolph. I feel like they got to find the next. I don't know what that is. Like one thing I didn't see a lot of. ATA people still do it. They do a lot of hand rolls and finger rolls and like combinations like that. I feel like back in the day, there was more like comma finger rolls and stuff. Now it's more releases, but I think each generation gets more and more difficult, more and more crazy. That's why we're at like 15 releases. But then I think each generation loses a little something too. Like even my generation lost something from the previous generation and then, something else. I don't know what that is. but sometimes it's cleanness. A lot of people were clean though at the tournament. I think what's missing? The shock value. I think because of the internet, which is great, but then also because you see everything on Instagram, on YouTube, you can go back, rewatch it whenever. I feel like there's something compared to when I first used to compete. If somebody was going up, you had to stop what you were doing and watch that performance because it might not be videoed and you might not see it again. And then, if I'm watching you and you decide not to do those moves again, that's it. Like that was the one time, and I missed it. So I feel like now everyone's like counting on it to be on Instagram, and there's so much crazy stuff on the internet that you see all these releases and stuff. And it's like, okay, it's cool.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because that's one of the ways that the sport has evolved in helping more people be able to see it. Sport Karate Zone, but also sportmartialarts.com, Point Fighter Live, like all of these different outlets that are making these videos available, whether it's in live stream format or Instagram Reels or YouTube videos or whatever. But there's all these different ways that you can go back and see all the action, which is great in terms of building a fan base. But I think you're right. I think we naturally lose some of that shock factor because I remember being a kid and exactly that feeling that you describe of like that sense of urgency. Like I'm not going to get to see this at least for another month, and they might not do the same thing again. You know what I mean? And I can't tell you how many times I've been telling stories about a form that no longer exists on the internet, and then I'm like, at the end of the day, you just had to be there. Like I can't describe what it is. Like there's one in particular that always stands out. And I don't know why. Maybe it's just because I was a big Corey Lutkus fan as a bow guy. But there's an empty hand form that Corey did on stage at Cat Classics one year where he did this like weird like stall to side flip thing that like I had never seen before. And it just stands out in my memory as like an awesome form. And there's like no record of it on the internet as far as I'm aware. I think you're right. I think that like the shock factor of me seeing Corey do that and like knowing him as a bow guy, that was something it inspired me to maybe trick one day, which obviously didn't work out. But anyway.
And definitely to add, like when I first got to the tournament, I was like, whoa, that was a lot of releases. Person's really good. Next person, I'm like, wow, that was really impressive. They did a lot. But then by the end of the night, I'm like, oh yeah, everyone does a lot of releases. It's like a standard thing, it kind of is like, And as far as social media, like not hating on it at all. You need to use social media as a tool. I think I know more of the people today than I did like a couple of years ago, just because of like Instagram and the Paul Mitchell Instagram and a couple other pages, clicking links. It's just more accessible. So I'm like, oh, I know this person. Oh, they're really good. So definitely for everyone out there, definitely use social media to your advantage. Because I definitely did before it even existed, when it was just like websites and message boards. Back to even when it was like AOL instant messaging,
Dude, the message boards were like huge for early tricking like culture and everything. That's crazy.
Bylang.com, sportmartialarts.com. Actually, it was called masslink.com.
Yep.
They had the two big websites. Steve Chirata had a big website. You were balling if you had a website. Only Steve Chirata and Daniel Sterling. Now it's easy. You can just go to Squarespace, like download a template, make it in like a couple hours. Back then you needed a webmaster. I was trying to contact people. They wanted like $10,000 at the time. I'm like, what? I was like 16. I'm like, oh man. I ended up getting a website. I had someone like make one for me. But yeah.
That's cool. There's two things in this kind of overview of like the way the sport has changed and your observations that I want to hit on. First, like the volume of releases, because I think that anytime it's me talking about volume of releases, people can roll their eyes and be like, well, of course Jackson thinks that, right? But I think that one thing that I'm seeing now that leads to what feels like this overuse of releases is that we see more releases being done without strategy. Right? Like one thing that I stand by about when I started doing 10, 12, 15 releases of form as a junior and it started working for me was that none of them were wasted, right? All of those tricks were essentially packaged into 3 combos, a combo for section 1, a combo for section 2, and a combo for section 3, which is effectively a page out of the tricker's strategy book, right? Where you have an opening trick, you have a trick combo that goes across to the side, and then you have something that goes to the corner before the end of the form, right? That's really all I was doing, was taking that strategy and applying it to weapons and using releases instead of kicks and acrobatics, right? But now sometimes just in order for people to get to that like magic number of releases, that, I'll see people do releases that are far below their skill level, but they just do them to try to get their release volume up. And that isn't always the most effective use of those releases. And that's for every weapon. And that's where I think what you're saying, there's a deficiency of like the combos and chucks, hand rolls and finger rolls. You could say the same thing about bow with like body rolls, especially like fast hand rolls, neck rolls and stuff.
Do people do a lot of rolls? Because I remember that was like a trend right before like you took over, Ross Levine, Nate, Corey Lucas. It was more about like neck rolls and all the shoulder rolls and stuff.
There's a few people that try to bring it back a little bit, but in a lot of ways it's a lost art. And some of it's the speed of the game, right? Like releases, because the bow moves so much faster when you're throwing it as opposed to when you're like waiting on it to get to another part of your body. So that like there's a lot of layers to that. Like I'm of the belief that if somebody can figure out a way to bring back body rolls and make them like fast enough that they don't have to break the rhythm of their form in order to implement them, I think that that's going to be one of like the next big things. And then obviously the big thing that's like out right now is people doing like weapons tricks in the middle of tricking and like
I've seen that. That's impressive. But then as you see more and more people do it, you're like, oh, okay. See, like for you, like I feel like staff was all about like neck rolls and things, and then it went into your you started the releases, and now I feel like everyone's kind of doing the same thing, like just doing a million releases. But I agree, they need to somehow tie it back into that old school way or find something new. But yeah, that is impressive, releasing of staff and doing a Webster or whatever trick.
Right, exactly.
Catching it.
And then the other thing I wanted to touch on that you mentioned, because this is not a popular opinion, and I feel like it should be. You said that you noticed, just kind of in watching people in general, that you saw a lot of people who are clean, right? And I feel like that is the most common frustration of like active competitors when they listen to some former competitors. And I seriously don't have anybody in mind when I say that. I just mean in generally, there have been older competitors that are critical of the new generation's basics in whatever way, right? And so it's refreshing because I look at it and I'm like, watch the tape. If you watch the tape, these guys they're extending punches, they're finishing strikes, they've got good 7 cuts. Like all of these elements are there, and it seems like some people just fail to recognize it, maybe because of resistance to change or who knows, right? But I want you to go into a little bit more detail on that and talk about like good things that you saw in terms of cleanliness, because that's not something that I think gets applauded as much as some of these current competitors probably deserve it to.
I think what always happens is the generation before hates on the next generation, no matter what, no matter who it is, tricking, weapons, sport karate, like anything. And then I feel like the generation after that, there's more of like there's less competitiveness. There's like a chill to it. I don't know. I find that with tricking, sport karate, the generation after me, I'm like, it was okay. I'm hating a little bit. Generation after that one, I'm like, oh, that's pretty good. That's impressive. Oh, wow. Yeah, I thought a lot of people were clean. Obviously, every generation is going to have some sloppy people. Yeah. But most of the time, I thought a lot of people were clean. Maybe missing something, but maybe it's just that shock value because of the internet, because everything's been done. Or maybe like I was saying, like with you, I feel like the last big trend was you releasing combos, breaking up that rhythm, different sections, doing all these different moves. And then I feel like everyone's like, all right, that's what wins. I'm going to do that. And I think for bow, that might work. But for some of the other weapons, I feel like it doesn't.
I do see a lot of that. I do see a lot of people trying to like do bow stuff with other weapons and seeing if it'll work.
And sometimes you got to do it, because I've taken that approach. I'm like, I'm going to do what he did with the bow. I'm going to do what the common person did this way, and I've seen them do the same back, things I've made up. I'm like, damn, the person did Aiden Kennedy did a trick and he twirled his bow staff. I'm like, oh man, that was like my gimmick for years. I would spin my nunchucks and do a flip, But even that, like my gimmicks, I had like, that was my thing I was known for. I would do a flip and I would spin the chucks. Then I evolved it to like hitting my legs in between while I'm flipping. Then like passing the weapon through my legs while I'm flipping, then doing harder tricks. Then like hand rolling while flipping. Then it's like, all right, now what? All right, I'm gonna do releases or more releases. But just finding your own thing. And I'm not saying that like at anybody. I'm not hating either. I think the new generation is actually really, really good. But I feel like they need to somehow evolve into something different. Something else I noticed too is the music. A lot of people use hip hop music, which back in the day we didn't. We liked listening to rap, hip hop, but no one ever used that type of music. Maybe it's because there's resistance now, because like you have to use the non-copyrighted music in the night show. I don't know. Maybe that's why.
I think that's part of it. I think people realize that like you got to use like stuff that is popular.
Gotcha.
Honestly, I'm surprised that we haven't heard more Kendrick at karate tournaments right
Yeah,
now.
I thought I would hear that at this
Yeah,
tournament.
exactly. But it's like because of the fact that in the majority of the night shows, not all, at Ocean States, by the way, which I'll do a quick aside about the Ocean States night show because this is some news that Sport Karate Zone broke. I think it was late last week that we broke this news.
Mhm.
So Ocean States, for any competitors watching, will be on Uvintex TV for streaming, which means competitors can use any music they want. The way that they do it, there is no copyright restriction with their system. And so you can use whatever music you want for the show. I know a lot of competitors love that because that's the way that it used to always be. And I see it on both sides. Like I get it in order for the sport to grow, some of these live streams that do require the non-copyright stuff, that is important for the growth of our sport and getting more people to see it. But it's also a breath of fresh air for the competitors whenever they can use whatever they want. The last quick aside before we jump back into this discussion is that if you were at Competes at the night show and you saw the new Sport Karate Zone fan scorecards that you can hold up when you see a form that you like, and if you think it's perfect, you can hold up a 10, right? Those will be back at Ocean State Grand National. So if you want to get one of these to have a little bit of a collector's piece of the Sport Karate Zone scorecards and bring some extra hype to the night show, they will be available again for the night show at Ocean States. So you guys have that to look forward to. Anyway,
question: Does anybody? Because I used to do this when I was younger, and I feel like towards the end of my sport karate career, it happened less and less. But if you went up and you got low scores, let's say Jackson Rudolph goes up 998, 998, and if the crowd didn't like that, they would boo the judges.
That still happens. Oh yeah,
it still happens. Okay.
Yeah,
like,
it doesn't. It doesn't normally. I've seen some instances where it isn't so much like the crowd, but it's. I've seen where when a certain group doesn't get the outcome that they want, then some boos and stuff will happen.
So I used to love when the crowd.
That's part of the game sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I like the signs though. 10, 9.9.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good way to like get the crowd involved. And I also, for other tournaments that I'm inevitably going to ask your permission to do it, I think it makes your show look good because then it looks like the crowd's a lot more engaged for if you see it on streaming or anything like that. It's not just like people sitting there like waiting for the form to be over. You know what I mean? But anyway, so jumping back to instead of talking about like how competitors look and the way that the actual strategy and the game has evolved, I want your take on just kind of the sport, like walking into the tournament room and just things that haven't changed that you're surprised, like, man, I really thought we'd be doing this differently, 10 years down the line or what have you, or things you notice that are different from when you're competing that you're like, you know what, this is a step in the right direction. This looks good. This helps present our sport better. Is there anything just from like an organizational standpoint, looking at the tournament that you were surprised either is now different or hasn't changed at all?
I was surprised. I started dating myself right away. I started talking about like handing in your card when you compete. I didn't know it was all digital, or maybe I didn't. I just forgot. Somebody had to tell me like we haven't done that in a long time. So that's cool that it's digital and stuff.
Or the night show draw with the playing cards. I don't have that anymore.
Oh yeah, you used to have to draw the cards. Like that was actually kind of fun. Someone would be shuffling them. Be Larry Carnahan, like you were playing a little game before the actual competition, But of course, then people are like cheating or claiming people are cheating, and there's all kinds of stuff. But it was always fun drawing cards, even if you got like, maybe sometimes I'd win 3 divisions and I pick 2, 3, and 4. I'm like, okay, I am going first. That was always fun. But yeah, I feel like the tournament looked like it was ran well. We're talking about like the sport evolving to something different. Maybe the rules have to change. So then on some divisions, the competitors can play to those rules, and then maybe the sport would evolve. Maybe it hit like a peak. I don't know. I definitely think your generation for juniors is like the peak of difficulty. Definitely.
Yeah. It was a crazy time too, especially when I was like 13 and I first started doing like the harder stuff. You had like Sammy and Kinsey coming up on the girls' side in 14 to 17. That was a stacked era with Austin Crane, Cole Eckert, Ross Constam.
Yep.
Oh my God, Reed Presley,
a
couple years older than me. So yeah, I mean, like the talent that you had from top to bottom in 17 and under for those few years, and we got to see it all on display because they did 17 and under grands. Now I'm not a fan of them going back to 17 and under grands. I am a fan of them putting boys and girls back together. I feel like we have too many different overall grands now.
Yeah.
But I don't think 17 and under is the way to do it because a 17-year-old shouldn't compete against like a 9-year-old. But
I agree, but also too, like back in the day, Rudy was 9 years old, and he was, even if he lost, like he was making us all look bad. It's like Rudy just punched as hard as the 17-year-olds. I'm only like 14. I'm like, man, he's making us all look bad, tricking, difficulty, everything, So I don't know. And then even when I first started, I used to lose in forms to Al Safransky, Gemma.
Yeah.
That was like some of my toughest competitors, the girls would dominate a lot of times. So maybe, I mean, I feel like it should be separate, it's probably not fair. Boys and girls, a 9-year-old and a 17-year-old, but maybe they should make some type of like super division or something. I don't know.
Right. And yeah, ultimately, if you're not going to put boys and girls together and you're not going to put age groups together, I still think that having an overall grand championship be just 2 competitors is somewhat anticlimactic. So maybe then you just put that whole age group together. Maybe it is a 13 and under, a girls' weapons, a boys' weapons, a girls' form, and a boys' form, or something like that. You know what I mean? Where it's like you're mixing. Well, I guess that'd be mixing boys and girls. I got to think about it more. But the bottom line is that like getting back to a little bit more depth in the overall grands, where we don't run it down so granular to be just a 1v1. Because I also think divisions are more exciting when they're deeper. I think that just whoever gets 9s and whoever gets 8s is also somewhat anticlimactic. But I want to hit on what you talked about, rule changes. Yeah, that could be cool. They do that for Korean Challenge, which is a newer thing that they're doing now too. But while we're talking about rules and like differences between the divisions, anytime this topic comes up, creative forms is like the immediate problem. Because, and you probably saw this from watching some of the creative forms divisions, we're in an era where I feel like when like you were in your prime, because I consider you to be one of the greatest creative forms competitors of all time.
Hey,
like you and Marcel Jones are like one
yeah,
of
Marcel is good.
Yeah. But you guys did a phenomenal job of making it very clear what creative was. You weren't trying to see just how close you could get to it being extreme. It almost feels like the current generation, and this isn't a criticism, it's an observation, because ultimately you're going to do what it takes to win. And I'll never blame a competitor for that. But it's almost like people are trying to see what they can get away with instead of trying to focus on winning the creative division with creativity, execution, and like making everything cut and dry of doing what a creative form was kind of meant to look like. And sure, there's certainly some rule reform that needs to happen to make that more clear. But I just want to get your take on like watching creative forms and kind of this development that's happened where it seems like people are just trying to walk that fine line.
It's NASCA's fault. This happened like over 10 years ago. I made a video actually, and I sent it to like a bunch of promoters explaining the difference between like 360 and like, because like a cheat 720, 2 spins in the air and kick, but you're cheating like 3/4 of the spin. And then no one lands. You could, but no one lands most of the time like on 2 feet. Although you could, you do like 3/4 of the spin on the ground, and then you spin like 1 time in the air. And then as you're landing, you're pivoting on the ground. So just as an example, that one move right there, you could say it's a 360 in the air, or is it a cheat 720? You're counting the full rotation, like the spin on the ground and in the air. So I in the beginning, like when I started doing creative forms, I might have done like 1 move that was pushing the boundaries, and the rest was just creative and just everything was set in that division. And then more and more people, especially a lot of students that I was teaching in their divisions, there's people pushing it. So then I had to like address it and be like, well, my student could do the same thing. We just didn't do those moves because we thought they were illegal. If you're allowed to do it, then, we're going to put them in the form. And then I made a video for NASCA, for the promoters, explaining all these moves, putting them in slow motion, pausing it like right at the takeoff, and then jumping and then pausing it like right before I land. I made it pretty good too at the time, because I was thinking like, oh, what if it ends up on like their website, or, they're like sending it out everywhere for people to use as an example, what's allowed and what's not. And they did nothing with this video, nothing with this knowledge. I talked to some people in person explaining it. They just said, oh yeah, thank you. Thanks for doing that. And so then of course you're going to push the boundaries. And like when I was going against Marcel, I think there's might have been like 1 or 2 moves we pushed. He did like an illusion twist, or did he? I think he did. He did. I did like a parafuso. I just made sure I kept my back a little bit more straight than normal. I didn't kick it as hard. I kind of did it at a different angle, like making sure I took off. So it was a 360. But you know what happens? You start competing more and more. Then like a year or 2 later, Mark Canizzado's doing like B-twist round, and he kind of like goes up like on an angle. Then I'm like, dang, to compete, to be competitive, now I have to do something like that. So now I'm doing a shuriken pop hook, cut to me doing flares in my form, which technically is, I'm not doing more than a 360 and I'm on the ground. But I don't think that division was intended for, doing a flare into a sweep and parafusos and crowd awakeners. And, so I think you just start pushing the boundaries more and more. So I think NASCA needs to like define what you're allowed to do and what you're not.
I agree. And at the very least, so I've got 2 quick points here and then we'll move on. But one big thing is there is nothing in the rule that specifies what body part you're basing the amount of rotation off of. Because I think most trickers would agree that the amount of rotation that you do in a trick, which naming conventions for tricking have gone way off the rails in terms of how many degrees you spin anyway. But most trickers would say like shoulders or hips, right? That is how you determine if you actually got the spin around. Like if there's a debate about if somebody landed triple cork or not, and if it was legit, you're going to look at like hips and shoulders to see what the orientation of the body was, right? And so are you basing it on when the competitor's foot first hits the ground? Are you basing it on what position they rotate to? Like clearly stating exactly when a trick is considered to be over is something that currently isn't in the rule. That I feel like should be reflected. You know what I mean?
Also, too, it's just how like they let people get away with things, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to do that. And then because I think when the creative division first started, it was super entertaining. And in the adult division, I was a kid at the time. I think this might have been like the second tournament. It was Charlie Lee's World Series of Martial Arts. And I'm pretty sure Charlie Lee just came down and disqualified like half the division. He was like, you're disqualified. You're disqualified. You're disrespectful. That was trash. You're done. You're done. You're done. All right, let's continue the division. And then I think after that, like we all got checked. It was like, okay, do not do this. Do not do this. Like the rules were, if they weren't clear in writing, you knew what you could get away with and what you cannot. So then we all did not try to get away with anything. And then slowly one move, and then that turns into something else. And then,
So the answer is we just need to bring Charlie Lee back and it'll all be okay.
I mean, maybe somebody strict needs to be like, hey, or they just need to define it in the rules. You could literally just attach one of my old YouTube links. I think it's still up there. I don't know. Awesome. Yeah, just make a decision. So, or maybe there's like, maybe it's evolved to traditional, creative, old school, creative, pushing the boundaries, extreme, where you just do a bunch of sloppy full twists.
Well, and I think that ultimately where the sport is moving to on the current trajectory is that essentially creative, musical, and extreme exist as 3 divisions where people essentially do the same thing, especially in weapons where for creative, you can just cut out the tricking and then you just do all the releases and it's the same form just without the tricking, right? And so we're moving in a direction where it's really not 3 separate divisions. It's really just 3 chances to get your ticket on stage. And so I think what we're moving to is more of, instead of having divisions, we're just having heats, right? Like you'd have in like snowboarding where like you have to win this heat to move on to the semifinals. You know what I mean? That's kind of like what getting to runoffs is now. It's like your divisions where you're all just doing the same form 3 times is really just trying to see how many tickets to the runoffs you can get, right? But anyway. If I go into all of that, we could really derail this podcast in another direction. So I want to bring it back to some storytelling because there's a lot. Matt and I could probably do 10 hours of podcasting and not share all of the stories that there are to uncover. But one that I wanted to get into, because this is just a classic story for any JPM member. And so at Competes, it was our first team event with 2 new members. We've got a new fighter in Enrique Latona and a new forms competitor in Philip Brumet, who you mentioned. And then I know, obviously, you saw Philip. I don't know how much you got to see Enrique, but they both had fantastic weekends. Enrique won open weight and the lightweight overall. Philip won the CMX Forms overall grand. And so we very recently on the team had the opportunity to, hear those first phone calls. And so I wanted to go back to your story of you getting on the team, getting that phone call. And I know you were pretty young at the time too. So I want to hear that story. And I think
does Steve Babcock still make the calls?
So now it's down to the divisional coaches. So Coach Damon calls the fighters, and then I call the forms.
I see.
People.
You're making the calls now. Look at you.
Yeah.
Wow. No, my phone call. Let's see. Back in the day, we had dial-up internet. For people that don't know, you have a phone line, a house line, and that's how you get on the internet. You have to like log in through that line, I guess, and it blocks the phone. And back at that time, not like my mom had a cell phone, but I think that was it. Like I didn't have my own phone or anything. So I'd be on the internet watching karate videos, downloading music, downloading videos, which would take like hours upon hours to download. And then my mom would be screaming at me like every day, basically, to get off the internet so she could use the phone. So I blocked up the phone line for hours. Then my mom was making some calls. And then as soon as she hung up with her phone rang, it was Daniel Sterling. And he was like, "We've been trying to call for hours. Get off the phone. Steve Babcock's trying to call Matt." We were like, and then my mom told me like, "Steve Babcock's going to call." I'm like, "Wait, what?" And then like, as soon as she hung up, like he immediately called. And then I answered the phone and talked to him for a few minutes. I didn't know what to say. I was young. I'm like, "Okay, sir. Thank you."
How old were you?
I kind of knew I was getting on. I feel like, how old was I? I think 14 turning 15, maybe 14 or 15. But the year before Diamonds, in that runoff, some Paul Mitchell people, some of the fighters, some of the executive team that I feel like normally don't watch me, or if they did, it's just like, people around the ring. I feel like they were really watching me. So like, and I killed it. And at this time I was more of a weapons guy than a forms guy. Forms was like a stacked division for runoffs. It was Rudy, Steve Chirata, Nick Begley, Kalman Choka was a top forms competitor. Everyone knows him as a double sword guy. He was unbeatable in forms. And somehow I did really good in this runoff. So I went up first, made it in. Raymond Daniels said I did really good after that. He was on Paul Mitchell at the time. And I think that was like the first time Raymond actually talked to me. And someone else, I think Chris Rodriguez, coach's son, said something to me, and I was like, "Oh, this is suspicious. I don't know. I feel like I might be getting on Paul Mitchell next year." And then sure enough, like a month or two later, I got the call.
That's awesome. And you mentioned like Steve and Rudy being in those runoffs too. I don't remember the timeline. Were you on first of that like trio of you guys, or was you already on?
It went like Daniel Sterling. Besides for you, who's like the only person I know that got on like at US Open. Yeah, it was like him and you. It's like a weird time. It's like in the middle. Like, wait, what? Daniel. Then the following year was Steve Chirata. And then, no, wait, maybe Steve got on first, and then Daniel. I can't remember. Steve and Daniel, and then it was me, Nick Begley. No, Nick was, I can't remember. I think Nick was already on. Me, Lauren, John Sue, and DX, I think, got on at the same time. And then Rudy got on with Caitlin like 2 years later. Yeah, it was like a stacked, picked up a lot of people that year.
Wild. You, Lauren, DX, and John Sue all at the same time. That's crazy.
Then the following year, I was the only junior. It was kind of crazy. No one on Paul Mitchell would watch me. They'd all get there later. They're all adults. I was the only junior that would compete. And then the year after that, they picked up Caitlin and Rudy. Yeah.
And obviously this weekend on Saturday, for those of you that are fans of Sport Karate Zone, on The Clean Truth with Ben Jones and Dawson Holt, they'll be having Rudy Rana and Steve Chirata on their show. Nice. So you can hear their stories of, getting on the team and how the timeline shook out and everything. So make sure you guys tune in this Saturday, March 15th. But anyway, the other thing, Matt, we talk about my mom just tried to call me and it took my window away. Hold on. All right, we're back. We're good. Mom, you should be watching the show. Why are you trying to call me? But no, it's funny you mentioned like being the 14, 15-year-old and then being the only junior on the team, because that was my experience. I got picked up at US Open, which happened to be your retirement tournament is when I was getting picked up. And
wait, was it? I think I competed a few times after that.
Was it US Open 2012 your last one? Did you have more?
Oh, you put the year. People are right now calculating. They're like, wow, it's a long time ago. You know what I think happened? I think I said this is going to be my last US Open. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think I was like, yeah, I'm done. Because I won double grands in NASCA and ISK. And I was like, I'll go off with a win. And then every tournament after that, Steve Babcock would call me and be like, all right, go to Capitals. It's paid for. You're going to win. I'm like, you don't know that. And he's like, you're probably going to win $2,000. That's $2,000. Don't you have students? You could be there for them, and I'm like, then I would go to the next tournament. Then he'd call me. And then I think I did, because I'm pretty sure I did like 2 or 3 tournaments with you, Capitals and Diamonds.
That's cool. Well, I'm glad it happened that way then.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure we competed, right? Or am I wrong?
What's up?
I think we were on the same team together for a couple tournaments, right?
Yeah, we should have been. Now that you mention it, because I remember that Caps. I was at a crazy runoff, and it was me and Austin Crane, because that was like the back and forth. So I had a little bit of time.
Out to Magic Stick, or was that another year?
No, that was before. I did Magic Stick like years before, which is funny because I was like a little kid using Magic Stick.
It was hilarious. It was awesome.
Yeah. But no, Austin Crane and I had some battles, and then he went to the adults not long after that, and that's when I was the only junior. But yeah, that team was crazy.
Oh, same story. See, you were the only junior. See, you only need like one good guy. That's it.
But so the thing that when I was prepping for this show, I was talking to my dad, and he reminded me of a story that you told him. Because you're right, like that whole getting picked up at U.S. Open thing is like super uncommon. Typically, Paul Mitchell like picks you up when you have like a month or 2 in advance of a tournament, so you can get your gear, get like mentally prepared, because it's a big deal competing for the first time on JPM. But my pickup situation was unique, and my dad was telling me you were actually in the room when the decision got made and everything went down.
If I remember correctly, no. Like a few tournaments before that, I was like, we should pick people up. Like we don't have a full team right now. You were one of the people I was pushing for, and they were like, no, we're not going to pick up anybody. You were on like the top of the list, but they were like, no, we're not picking anyone up. Because they're talking about 1 person, 2 people, a bunch of people. So I was like, damn, that sucks. All right, whatever. Because it didn't feel like much of a team my last year competing, to be honest. And then I remember US Open, I was walking in, I had my headphones on. I'm walking, anyone that's been to US Open knows the hotel rooms are like in the way, way back. So, I listened to like a whole playlist before I even got from the hotel to the tournament. And I was walking in, I'm like in my zone, just kind of saying hi to people, whatever. And then I saw Lauren and you, and I'm like, and then Lauren stopped me, and I'm like, what's going on? What's up? And normally I feel like you would say like, hi, or what's up? I feel like you were just standing there. And I said, hey, and she looked at you. Then I looked at you. I looked back at her. Look back at you, and I'm like, wait. Then you had a Paul Mitchell shirt on. I'm like, then I'm like, you're on the team? And I was like, yo, congrats, if I remember correctly. And then I remember feeling bad. I was like, damn, I hope he doesn't even know it. Like, this is the tournament with the most pressure. They put him on like day 1. It's like, you better win, be in this night show, Yeah, I don't know.
But maybe what my dad was thinking of was like the weeks leading up to it when you were like already pushing, which I don't think that people realize this, and I guess I'll kind of air it out. But like ultimately, you were somebody that was like really a visionary and like pushing for like the right people to get on the team, and ultimately everybody that you were pushing for ultimately did get on the team. But like that's how Team Emig happened. Team Emig was like people that you were like, these guys should be on Paul Mitchell, and they haven't been picked up yet, so I'm gonna make a team, right?
And that's something I'm really proud of, actually. Like, I was pushing for you. You got on. I never really trained you or anything, but like there's 5 people that got on Paul Mitchell that I've trained: Sammy Smith, Mackenzie Emery, Danny Ecken, Aiden Considine, Tyler Weaver. And even like a few years ago, I was teaching Philip Broom a couple lessons, and that was one of his goals to get on Paul Mitchell. And I was telling him, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to fix this, you got to do that. Now he's on. So, it's good to see like, the next generation of talent making it to Paul Mitchell.
Absolutely, for sure.
But yeah, does that story line up when you got on the team? Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, it does. No, that all checks out.
Were you nervous? Was there a lot of pressure on you, or no, not at all?
I mean, I always hate answering the nervous question because my answer sounds super unrealistic, but it's the God's honest truth. That like I was never really a competitor that got nervous. Like I went out there and did my thing. You know what I mean? It was never it just wasn't part of my experience to like get anxious about competing. I looked forward to the opportunity to get out there and show what I had. You know what I mean? And so with US Open, like I wasn't nervous because I'd been wanting to be on Paul Mitchell for so long. It was more like just kind of relief that it finally happened and I didn't have to think about when it was going to happen anymore. You know what I mean? That being said, I remember my first form sucked. I remember my first form, I messed up like 3 times. It was some random division, like creative weapons. Somehow I still wound up winning, which doesn't make any sense. But like, and I remember it was like the classic, like all the executives were like lined up watching, and I'm like messing up 3 times. Like, God, this sucks. But at the same time, like from the whole weekend perspective, I was already a 2-time U.S. Open champ leading up to that, going for a 3rd straight title. And so I was like, you know, in some ways it was just like what I expected the job to be anyway. You know what I mean? And that's the other cool thing is my first 3 U.S. Opens, I was on a different team for every one of those wins. The first one was on Premier, and then Premier got rebranded essentially to change the game.
Okay. I almost consider that the same, but yeah, I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, they're effectively the same.
You're right. Forgot about that.
But anyway, so enough about talking about me, about talking about the current generation, stuff like this. We got Matt Emig on the show. We got to talk about Matt Emig a little bit. So I want you to toot your own horn with this one a little bit. But talk about just some of like the big wins that stand out in your career. I mean, obviously over the years, things start to blend together. We talk about that U.S. Open where you had a crazy tournament in what was your last year competing, even if it wasn't your last tournament. But just as you reflect on it, a career that obviously you've got a lot to be proud of. What are some of those big moments that stand out to you and mean a lot to you as a competitor?
I remember the first wins, like my first Warrior Cup. I was a kid. I only have one. I never won again, to be honest. But I always was trying to get that second.
I didn't know you got it as a junior. That's awesome.
They changed the rules through the years. So like when I won it, it was way different. I had to go against 17 under weapons. There was no seeds. There was like a special division. There's a lot of people in it. Somehow I managed to win that. And then I went against the 17 under forms winner and 17 under traditional winner. And then that's how you won the Warrior Cup. And then they gave out one for adults, men and women together, and they gave out one for men's sparring. They only gave out like 3 Warrior Cups. So I won back then, and then after that, I just never could get my hands on another one. But the Warrior Cup,
I had some more, but that's not your fault. I just said you probably should have had some more, but that's not your fault.
Sometimes, like diamonds a bunch. I like screwed up. Like a couple times, I thought like I'm gonna win diamonds, and then just doesn't work out. But no, like my first U.S. Open, my first ISKA win was big for me. My first Warrior Cup, first time winning Bluegrass Nationals. That was like a big grand championship for me. I got a watch at the time. Bluegrass again, another year I won double grands. I think that was like my first time winning forms and weapons grands. French Open 3 when I won that, just because going against everybody, I went against the adults and won. And then more importantly, just like everyone was like, oh, Matt's the future. He's the best. He's going to be so good. Like he's good now, but like in a few years, he's going to be like the GOAT. And I'm like, oh, wow, thank you. Okay. And then the rest just kind of blend together. My last year, I'm proud of my last year. I think I won 16 grand championships in 1 year overalls. That's wild. 8 weapons, 8 forms. And that last U.S. Open we talked about, I won double NASCA grands and ISKA grands, forms and weapons. So I think that's why I was like, all right, I'm done.
That's dope. And that's something a lot of people don't realize because it's come up a couple of times now. What you see on the night of champions at U.S. Open is not the NASCA overall. We compete for the money and the NASCA overall during the daytime, and then you go on stage later, and then you compete for your ISKA titles. And they're like totally separate things. A lot of fans that watch the sport don't realize that because when you see the videos from just like the daytime, you assume it's runoffs or whatever. You don't realize that that's like the overall grand.
Yeah, U.S. Open's like its own tournament within its own tournament.
Exactly. And there's nothing like everybody crowding around the promoter's table to figure out who else on stage and like that whole thing going on.
1 year, I remember they somehow did some I don't know how they did it. And I wasn't in for forms. And I'm like, what? How is this possible? And then I won my divisions and I'm like, am I in the night show? And they said, not yet. Then I won runoffs and I'm like, am I in the night show? They said, not yet. Then overalls, like some random guy won, someone from the Wushu division. Then I was like, am I in overalls? And they were like, no. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And then I went back, showered, came back, and then somehow I was in the show. I'm like, I was going to do a form right now. Okay.
Yeah. That might have been the year that was. I want to say it was like 2010
11,
or 11.
10 or 11.
Yeah, there was one year in like the early 2010s that it was the decisions were crazy, and I don't mean like crazy good or crazy bad. I just mean like crazy late. Like people found out that they were either going to be on stage or not at like 4 p.m. on Saturday.
It's like, and okay, you go. You're going up right now. Yeah, you're next.
Exactly. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about as we kind of look back at your career and try to pinpoint some memories, one thing that I always look at as a sport karate historian is your career can often be told in like this sequence of these great rivalries that you were a part of, right?
Yeah.
Whenever Sammy Smith is on the show, she always talks about the war with you and Sammy Vasquez.
Everybody brings that up. I guess that
well, it's a great rivalry. And then there was like you and Mark at US Open, particularly. I remember there are a lot of back and forth at US Open with you and Mark C. And then
you need that. Like without competition, like the people that don't have a competitive division, they might win, they might rack up titles, but you need competition. You need to get your butt whooped. You need to win and be like, I shouldn't have won. I feel bad. I need to do something for the next tournament. You know, you need to be mad that you should have won and someone else got you. You know, you need to be defeated. You got to take your victories or losses. I feel like that's how you grow as a person, as a martial artist. And that's how you get better. Because there's been times I've won and I'm like, yo, I'm actually really nervous because this person's going to come back at the next tournament. I know they're not just going to come back, do the same form that I just whooped them with, you know, and just take it. Like, I'm actually really nervous. What's going to happen at the next tournament? I got to step up instead of thinking like, oh, I just won, you know, I'm chilling now. But yeah, Sammy Vasquez, Mark Canonzato, Cal Menchoka, Rudy Raynon, Marcel Jones, Steve Chirata, Corey Lucas, Ross Levine. You know, these people pushed me to be better, push the boundaries, get stronger, cleaner, faster, come up with new tricks, be more creative, better performance, new music, just leveling up. And I'm sure there's some other people too. Did I forget anybody? Maybe.
Well, anytime we get into like the name listing, we're always going to so the thing I'm curious about, because it's interesting that like, because Sammy as a fan, Sammy Smith remembers vividly like the war with Matt and Sammy Vasquez, right? And then for me as a weapons guy, like I remember the battles between you and Kalman, right? Like from the fans' perspective, I feel like everybody kind of like pinpoints the specific matchups that interested them most. So for you as the person that was actually like in with all those legends, right? And you yourself being one, obviously. But for you, like, do any of those matchups stand out to you as like, yeah, like everybody pushed me and like, you know, we all got each other at some point, but what stands out to you is like the one where, like for me in my mind, it was always like Reed. And that was like, even though I had Cole and Tyler and Austin when I was a junior, even though I had other people that pushed me, at the end of the day, like the rivalry for me, and maybe because it was single bow guy versus double bow guy too, and we're best friends, but that's beside the point. So for me, it was always Reed, right? So for you, was there anybody that like out of all of these things, you're like, this was the rivalry that I feel like helps me develop most or told my story the best or whatever?
Sammy Vasquez for sure. I think I've said this before. Yeah, Sammy just was like a thorn in my side. He just pushed me. If I won, it still wasn't enough. You know, if I lost, it was like, and sometimes, you know, I deserve to lose. Sometimes I'm scratching my head. I'm like, am I crazy? Did I lose? Because am I being biased? Or, you know, or if I won, sometimes, you know, somebody would be like, Sammy, you killed it. I would hear someone say it. And I'm like, yo, was that like, are they saying that he was better just now? Or, you know, are they just being nice? Like, I don't know. It's just, he pushed me a lot. I really got a lot better going against Sammy. And, you know, it was just crazy. Like using social media back then, there wasn't Instagram and Facebook and everything. It was on websites, but they would post our videos and be like, who do you think should have won? It's like, you know, then you guys should actually do that too. You could do polls, but there would be polls like after the tournaments. And that's why it was like a war. And they would always write about it, like who won, or they would kind of hint at who they think should have won, or, you know, but yeah, Sammy pushed me a lot, I got to say.
So for my historical knowledge, obviously I know that as martial artists, everything ends with respect. And out of all the people you named, all of those were essentially friendly rivalries over the year, many of them teammates. But with the Sammy thing, I mean, people called it the war for a reason. Was there any ever like personality differences or any actual beef, or was it always friendly? It was purely a
It was a
competitive.
different time back then. So I don't know. I mean, me too. I guess I was a little bit more aggressive when I was younger. I was going to tournaments, no parents, just doing what I wanted to do. So I went to a tournament. I think that's how it started. And my back was really hurt. I wasn't training. Um, and then Sammy came out and did like the same combo that I was doing like the previous year. He did it better. I'll admit it, faster. And he did it into a split. So I was like, wait, what? I'm like, yeah, so then I just freestyled a form, which was pretty badass. I got to say, it was like one of my best forms. Freestyled. It was like moves I always wanted to do, like in an order. I was like, screw it, I'm just gonna do whatever I feel like. And I ended up messing up at the end. Still took third, but he beat me. Then the next day we went against each other. Then I was a little aggressive, like even in the night show. Like this was like a b-boy thing. It was like basically, man, you're biting, you're copying somebody. So I kind of started this thing, and then Sport Marshall Mass Link was like writing articles, and then whenever Sammy went, he like came with a crew of people. It was Team Straight Up, or maybe it was G-Force. I think it was Straight Up back then.
At the time, yeah.
And it also was Mark, who I also went against in the runoffs in the night show. So it was like Mark is backing Sammy and his dad and Mr. G and like a bunch of Straight Up people. And then Team Straight Up was like, team fights was a big competition with Paul Mitchell. So they were going at it. And then I'm the only junior at the time. So then I'm going against them. And in the beginning, Sammy was beating me. So then I had to level up, come up with a plan, which at first I think was just to be cleaner, which worked for like a tournament or two. Because I honestly was slacking in my tricking. Sammy was like way ahead. Then I leveled up my tricking. And then I got to the point where I would just watch his form and be like, okay, I know what I have to do. Because sometimes I'd level it up. Sometimes I would be like, all right, what I have planned is okay. It's enough. Sometimes I'd be like, what I have planned is not enough. I have to just go for it. It's do or die time. Go big or go home. And sometimes it worked out. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes I thought I should have won, maybe not. Then sometimes I thought he should have won and I won. So you never really knew. It was hard to gauge, to be honest. Plus the crowd. Because honestly, bringing Mark up, like one time I beat Mark, but I didn't like that the crowd was more into his form. And when like he got the scores, I was like looking around, and this was at World Series of Martial Arts one year. I remember I was looking out into the audience, and it was really dark. It was hard to see. And I'm like, is this Straight Up people, or is this like the actual 1,200 people here? Do they think he was better? Because I would rather have the 1,200 people watching cheer for me and think I'm better than the 7 judges, to be honest. I would trade that any day. So like in that time, like, it just makes you insecure. It makes you crazy. You're like, I won, but did I deserve to win? And then in reverse, sometimes you have the crowd and you don't have the win and you're like, what are the judges looking at? So, definitely helps. Different measurements pushing the boundaries.
And one thing I love about the way that you break that down, and that I want young competitors to take away from this conversation, is that you were able to be an aggressive competitor without being too disrespectful. You know what I mean? Like, you use the word aggressive yourself, which is the word that's the reason I use it. But it's like, I feel like sometimes that mentality is missing because we appropriately teach sportsmanship and respect first, as we should.
Yeah.
But I feel like in the current generation, sometimes people just get too friendly, and there isn't enough of the like, no, but I want to beat you. I want to be better than you. Right. And we get lost in this whole, like, every form, you should be the best version of yourself. And it's like, no, you didn't show up to be your best self. You showed up to beat that guy. Like, that's
when Sammy and I were going at it, people would be like, get him, Sammy, get him. Like it would literally be like that. Like it was aggression. It was aggressive. It was like a whole team, like a gang of people being like, yeah. And then my people, same thing. They were like, just talking smack on the sidelines while we're going. They weren't just like, do your best. Yes. Oh, okay. Awesome.
And that's one of the things that made the Straight Up JPM rivalry in that era so great. Everybody goes back to the team fights and the Exodus where Ray and Jotty went to Straight Up and then beat Paul Mitchell at Ocean States, because that's like the most iconic part of the rivalry. But the forms and weapons stuff that was going on in the years following that, with yourself versus Mark and Sammy, and there's a number of other examples that we could go into. But like that is a very underrated part of this whole thing. Is like the forms and weapons component of the straight up JPM rivalry made it that much better, right?
Definitely. Like I remember one year the fighting team lost. So it was a big defeat. And then they turned to us and like, you guys better win. It was me and Daniel, Team Stink. And we're like, okay.
That's fun. And so the other thing I want to get into is we get close to wrapping up the show here, but there's one thing we love to do on this show is we love to do top fives because it's a great way to kind of dive deeper into the history, bring up some names that people don't necessarily hear all the time. And I go back to the show that I had Mike Guthrie on, which is a while ago now. We need to have Mike back on. But when I had Guthrie on, I asked him what I thought was a really interesting question about who his like greatest in-form tricker of all time is. Not just tricking, but like in a form in sport karate tournaments. Because back then, like to be the person who landed the trick, you had to do it in a form. You couldn't just
you did.
YouTube, right? And his answer was Josh Durbin, which I went back and watched some Josh Durbin tapes, and he was definitely ahead of his time with like gainer switch court combos in like the mid 2000s and stuff like that. But my greatest in-form tricker of all time, and maybe this is just because I'm a Matt fanboy in some ways, but I always thought that like the creativity you brought to your tricking, the way that you would actually kick when you were tricking, the difficulty you had, the style, like for all those reasons, like Matt has always been my favorite in-form tricker of all time. But I want to hear your top five. If you had to rank five of them just off the dome, in-form trickers, who do you respect the most?
All right, my number, I think 2 through 5 will be like out of order. I'm just going to kind of go random. But my number one person would have to be Anthony Atkins. During this time, people have to understand, imagine a world where there's no Instagram, no YouTube. Like let's use Michael Guthrie for an example. He's the best tricker. Imagine he didn't have trick samplers and he didn't post videos on Instagram. If you wanted to see his newest tricks, his best tricks, you had to go to a tournament and watch his form. And then every form he did like 2 or 3 new tricks that you've never seen before. You would freak out. The whole tournament would shut down and run to watch his form. You wouldn't care if he got first place or 10th place. You would just be there to see what he's going to throw and what he would do. And then you would lose your mind. You'd be like, that's what it was like watching Anthony Atkins. He would go up and invent 2 or 3 new moves you've never seen before. Do 2 or 3 moves you've seen before, but no one else can do. It was super entertaining. He didn't just do different forms. He threw different formats. He would start in the corner and go like, and not every one of them was my favorite, but it was just interesting. And I would study it and be like, that part was really cool. This, not so much. I don't know why I did that. Or, it was just so entertaining. Always use different music. Half of people's signature songs that they've used, Anthony probably used first. I don't know where he got his music and how he had access to like a whole library of songs, but he would use a song and then just move on. Next division, next tournament, new song. And then he had his like go-to songs that he always used that he would use more than once, but super entertaining. I would stop what I was doing to watch an Anthony form. And then to get my hands on the videos and the footage, sometimes it would take like a month or 2 to get the video from Black and Blue Productions, and you'd have to pay like $60 for a video. My friend Will Valentine always somehow had the footage. He always had tapes compiled from different people. So that was like one of my favorite things to do. We'd go to Daniel Sterling's house and we'd just watch hours of videos that some of it is on the internet and some of it is not. It's probably in like 360p quality. But we'd watch so much stuff. And Anthony did so many moves. He invented so many tricks that it's insane. It's basically like I said about Michael Guthrie. It's like if samplers didn't exist on Instagram, you had to go live to watch them and you lose your mind. It would be just insane, So Anthony Atkins, definitely number one. And then I feel like it would be Steve Cherada, because Steve Cherada was kind of the same. He had a website and there was videos, but there's some of my favorite Steve Cherada forms. He fell, he messed up. It was like Steve experimenting, figuring things out. But one particular form, it was like this tournament in Tennessee, and he did like a reverse hyper swipe. I've never seen him do this before. I think he kind of stumbled on it. He did a double B twist and fell. Then he did his Cherada grab. And like back then, he didn't have it figured out. Oh, Steve's on there. He did his Cherada grab, but there's different variations of grabbing it. and if you watch different samplers and like I would study videos and like the one he does now, everybody knows. And that's probably because he could stick it the most and it's like his most signature. But like the way he did it, he like held it so long and flung it out and he kind of like crashed. And even like me copying it and doing that move too, the way I do it is because like I was trying to be different than him, but also like it's just the most consistent way to land it. So I like came out an angle and like kind of did an axe kick. Steve's never fallen. He never did. There's a Tennessee form though, I swear to you. But like Steve doesn't want to hear him messing up, but I watched this video like a million times. I was trying to figure out this reverse hyper swipe. At least that's what Will Valentine called it. So like, I don't know. I definitely would say Steve. I'm kind of going by errors. I'm not really like ranking like number one, number two, but first Anthony and then Steve, because Steve also is a creative person. So he would switch up his form. So he might do a form, he might win, not like it that much, and then change it and run off. So you might never see that form again, unless you have that tape. So, and back to like what you were saying too, like about Corey Lucas, like there's no footage of it. It just makes it more special, So definitely Anthony Atkins, definitely Steve Tirada, definitely Sammy Vasquez. Mm-hmm. I could go back, I don't know, when was this, like 20 years ago? Sammy Vasquez doing a hand combo, cheat 1080, setup, cheat 900 on the bad side, cheat 900 on the other side. Then he does a full-on combo in one form. That was like section 1. Insane. I've never seen anyone do that much difficulty packed into like one little section. Would you say top 5?
You got 2 more spots.
2 more spots. Too many people to name. Some juniors. Female, Mackenzie Emery. Yeah. Doing backside 1080s to box cutter combos at a young age. Going against the guys. Cork swing through cork, hyper 9s, Webster into the split. Probably some more tricks I'm leaving out. That's pretty crazy. Some of those moves I've never done in a form. What's that, 4? Oof, number 5. I don't know. Steve, help me out. Is he on here?
We'll give Steve a chance to comment, but as we're talking about this, we're talking about informed tricks. There's it just came to my mind because in the hype reel that I posted for this podcast, like one of my favorite forms of all time is your 08 US Open with the rodeo cork and the spin out.
Oh yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Where did you get the idea to do the spin out? Like, because to me, like that was the thing that made it off the chain. It wasn't just a rodeo cork. It's not like you landed it and then spun out of it, still holding the foot. Like, where did that idea even come from?
So I had a form, and then I got sick of this format. Forget the tricks and the moves. It was, and even back to Steve, he one time even said, "Yeah, your form's just predictable. I don't know, it's just not as exciting because I couldn't get the crowd. I couldn't get them going. I'd win, but it wasn't enough for me." And then I'm like, damn, I took that to heart. I'm like, I have to like break the format, do something unexpected. So at first I was doing a different routine and it just wasn't as good. It was different. It was cool. You might click it on YouTube and watch it. I'm like, oh, that's nice, but it wasn't as good as my old forms. And then I finally cracked the code. I was in a trick battle in New York. I was going against Crazy Asian. He was throwing some crazy tricks. That was his name. And I did this combo. I was like, that was his tricking name, Crazy Asian. People back in the day know who I'm talking about. And I did that combo. And like right before I went, I was like experimenting with doing the shirkin and grabbing my leg, but it didn't really sell. I just grabbed it for like a second. And in this battle, I'm like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to grab my foot and just spin around like a bunch of times. So I did that and the whole crowd just went nuts. And I spun around a few times. I just put my hands up. Then I threw a Webster, it was a battle. And then I reviewed the footage and I'm like, that's it. I have to not just grab and like, throw a punch. I have to hold on for an extra spin and then throw the punch, So yeah, that happened in a trick battle. And then I kind of broke format. I was doing like this Brandy Tirada grab, going to the corner. Yeah. That happened in another trick battle in France. I was tricking and there was like a huge line. Everyone was like waiting so they could do their trick combo going in this direction. And I was on this side of the stage. And I'm like, what can I throw? I don't want to wait on this line. I just want to go. What can I throw that hits the audience in front of us, like at this angle? Then I did a Brandy flash. And I did it so high that I was like, I could have grabbed my legs or did something else out of it. Then I'm like, oh, I should do a Tirada grab. And then this all kind of happened around the same time. So then I kind of so from like tricking battles, and then I was testing it out. It worked, and then it became like a new form.
That's dope. And now that Steve's come up a couple of times now, we got to give one more plug to the podcast coming up this Saturday with JPM's current Sync Forms duo, Ben Jones and Dawson Holt, with obviously one of the greatest JPM Forms duos of all time with Steve and Rudy. They've got the show coming this Saturday. And so as an advertisement for that, if you will, Matt, do any like great Steve and Rudy, maybe the two of them together, any great stories come to mind of like the years of you guys being on the team together?
I mean, definitely a bunch, but you'd have to give me something to get me going just to think about, or someone's going to have to write in. I don't know.
Let's go. If I just spitball a tournament, can you think of a story from that tournament?
Maybe. Let's see.
No, the easy one's U.S. Open. Give me a U.S. Open, Steve and Rudy, something that happened.
Steve and Rudy together?
Or just one of them, whatever comes to mind. I'll take whatever you got.
Steve's story. We did a trick battle. That was a synchronized trick battle. I don't know why they did that year. We had to be synchronized with our tricks. We literally didn't practice at all. We made it up. We talked about it like before we left to go back to our hotel rooms to get ready to go to the night show. I think we both were in for forms and weapons and stuff that year. Or actually, maybe I wasn't. I wasn't actually. I think that was the only time I was up on stage. That was the only division. But yeah, we went up, and then like in the middle of it, we were watching people. Steve's like, I don't think we have enough passes. Let's make up one more. And then we just like whispered it. He was like, let's do this. And then he said it. And I'm like, okay. And then literally, I'm like, what side do you want to be on when we do it? And we like talked about it on the stage. And then I'm like, okay, we'll do it in between this pass and this pass. And then we ended up winning somehow without any training. But yeah, that was fun.
That's dope. And then on the Rudy side, any Rudy stories?
Give me a tournament so I could think of something.
We'll go diamonds for a Rudy story.
Diamonds. Diamonds, okay. A Diamond National story with Rudy. This is crazy that I could just think of these things.
But I say we need to do another show and just do this the whole time.
You just say a name and a year or a person. Diamond Nationals. There was a year I did not go. I think Daniel was telling me, he's like, yo, Rudy did something crazy in his combo form. You know the finger roll he does where he goes like in a circle? Rudy did that like 4 or 5 years before everybody probably started seeing him do it. Mm-hmm. Daniel told me he did it in the division, and then he didn't do it again. Or maybe he might have done it in runoffs, but he stopped doing it after that. So he told me about it. I thought it was crazy. And then I'm remembering this because I just went to compete nationals. I was talking to Emily and Nick from sportmartialarts.com. And we were talking about how I bought this DVD from them where you can like search in their database for certain forms and divisions. And they would like make you a special custom disc. And I found that form of Rudy so I could watch it. It was never posted on the internet. And I paid a lot of money for it. It was like $5-10 a form, I think. I maxed out the DVD. But yeah, it was worth it too, I gotta say.
That's awesome.
It was worth
that DVD itself is probably worth something nowadays if you can ever find it.
Yeah, I had a Rudy form from Diamonds where he did that finger roll. I had one where he did this outro, which I've never seen anyone do before. And if you think about it, no one really does an outro. When as an instructor too, you're teaching, right? You talk about like the walk-in, the intro, section 1, section 2, section 3. Some people have a section 4. What about the outro? Most kids finish and they're like, they look at their coach, their parents, they kind of walk off like where they're tired. Rudy did like an outro. He finished, he punched, he walked back, he screamed, he did another pose. His music was like still going as he left, and he was hitting beats until he walked out of the ring. That's pretty wild. Something to think about for everybody competing as an idea.
That'd be sick.
Have an outro in your form.
That'd be sick.
I guess the only time I've ever really done an outro, I did a raise and I walked off. But
cool.
You know.
I love it. That's awesome, man. Well, hey, I know that we've been on the pod now for over an hour, so I want to go ahead and wrap things up. But for any young competitors watching, we've mentioned how there's always something to look forward to, whether it's the next big goal in sport karate or whether it's what you're going to mobilize that sport karate career and use those talents to be able to achieve outside the sport. And then obviously with you being successful in the stunt industry, I'd like to close with just any words of wisdom, advice you have for maybe especially like kids in that like 14 to 17 age group right now that are like in that pivotal point in life where they're competing right now. They think they want to do the Hollywood stuff. Just what advice do you have for those competitors that are tuning in?
Train hard, train smart, take care of your body, recovery, You can train hard, but dumb. There was times where I did that. You have to train smart training. Take care of your body, eat well, recovery. Young kids probably don't have to do this, but like cold plunging, I got into, basically ice baths, cryotherapy, saunas, hot tubs, stretching, foam rolling, longevity. Take care of your body, especially if you want to do something else with it, performing, stunts, acting, whatever it is, teaching. Stunt advice or like in the entertainment business.
Yeah, go for it.
Just follow other people on Instagram, YouTube, study. There's a lot of information. Use social media as a tool. Use it as a marketing tool to get your name out there. I guess that's it for right now that I could think of off the top of my head.
No, that's great stuff. And
Yeah.
I love it because it's actionable. It's all things that like these kids can like start doing now to try to set themselves up for more success in the future. And by the way, for those of you that are watching and like hearing these stories from Matt, if we get lucky enough to have Matt or somebody like Matt at tournaments again, come up and say hi. Like you guys can ask some of these questions too. These people are not scary. And I remember being the little kid that thought some of these people were scary.
You were never really scared. I feel like you always said hello. You were nice.
I mean, yeah, but like part of that was it was like after I started winning. Once you start winning, you like lose your fear of that stuff. But like before you're good, you're like, oh man, like it's like have you seen the clip of I think it was the first episode of The Clean Truth where Dawson's telling a story and he's like talking to his mom. He's like, that's Matt Emig over there. Have you seen that clip?
I didn't. What happened?
Hilarious.
Check it out.
No, it's just like Dawson at like one of his first NASCAR tournaments, and he just remembers seeing Matt Emig and like trying to tell his mom, like, no. I gotta send you that clip. It's a good one.
Yeah, send that to me, please. That's funny. I was the same way though. Like the same thing happened. I mean, I remember one of my first big NASCAR tournaments. I went and David Douglas sat like right next to us, and then, he ordered orange juice, and then the waiter came, and I'm like, "Oh, I'll have orange juice." Like, and then my dad said, "Hey, it's my son." He introduced me, and I'm like, "Oh," that's all I really said. But I didn't even want orange juice, to be honest. Didn't even go with my meal, but I just got it because he got it. But yeah, advice to people: just meet your heroes, people you think are cool. Just don't be shy.
For sure. I love it, man. Well, hey, Matt, thank you again so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
Great episode. We need to make this like an annual tradition, like after competes or something.
Yeah, we should, right? You just name a year, a person, and a tournament, and then just go.
That's the next one. I love it. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all this great advice to young competitors, as well as just kind of talking shop with me for a little over an hour. So thank you so much for your time. Any closing comments before we get out of here?
No, I think we covered everything. Thanks for having me. It was fun. Let's do it again.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure, man. Huge shout out to everybody tuning in, everybody supporting Sport Karate Zone. We are extremely proud and blessed by the response the community has had to Sport Karate Zone. We just had our 1 year anniversary of SKZ at Competes. So thank you guys all for your continued support, watching the podcast, hitting the share button, dropping the comments. It really does do a lot for the brand. And ultimately our goal of just trying to get Sport Karate to a broader audience and help more people see what it is that we do. So hopefully that leads to more opportunities for competitors in the future. So thank you guys. Thank you to Century Martial Arts for everything that you guys have done for Sport Karate Zone, for making this podcast happen. And one more big thank you to Matt Emig for coming back on the podcast. This has been episode 137 of the Jackson Rudolph Podcast, and I'll see you next time.